Hello and welcome to EBAday 2021. I'm Hannah Wallace, and calling into our virtual studio today is Jens Audenaert, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Payments at Diebold Nixdorf. So Jens, thank you very much for calling in.
Thanks for having me, Hannah.
Good to have you on. So yes, in the last year, we've seen a number of dramatic changes across the banking payments industry and witnessed a clear acceleration of digital transformation. And where I'd really like to start our interview today is looking at some of the big shifts you've seen as well as this, and maybe some of the top trends you're noticing today. So let's start there.
Sure. You're absolutely right. I think with the COVID pandemic, we really have seen, I would call it an acceleration of what we were seeing before. And I would really highlight, as you said, digital payment vehicles, digital payment transaction volumes going through the roof. But in general, it's really just an acceleration of the pace of change that we're seeing in retail banking and in the payment space. And so, especially the last year, a lot of that has been contactless payments, but it's much more than that, right? For the consumer, it's really about having the payment being an integral and seamless part of the buying experience. They want new ways to pay, and they want them available anywhere and anytime. And so I think that's really what we've been seeing for a couple of years, but definitely has been accelerating, like many other parts in technology and in society, accelerated by COVID. And so with that ever-fasting change in pace that's expected from consumers based on their behavior, I think that also for banks means that they need to adapt quicker than ever. And it presents great opportunity for them to identify new revenue streams, bring to market new service offerings, whether it's on their own or through partnership with fintech players. But with that opportunity, I think when banks look internally, they are faced with challenges as well. They have business processes that rely on an IT infrastructure and solutions that in many cases is decades old, right? We're talking large monolithic applications, millions of lines of code that have been written decades ago. And that presents a lot of technical debt for the banks. It makes it very hard for them to actually adapt to those changes in consumer behavior and consumer expectations. And it makes it almost impossible for them to do that quickly enough. And so I think bank really need to have a good look internally, look at their infrastructure and see and realize that effectively many of those pieces have reached their effective end of life and need to be switched out.
Well, exactly. As you say, there's some real issues with legacy systems and technical debt, which is the sum of application debt, architectural debt, infrastructure debt, and organizational debt, as you say. So why do you think banks are ready now then to make the change to modern technology for their payment solution? Why now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Hannah. And I think in truth, many of the key stakeholders at a majority of banks, they've seen the need for change. They're aligned on the need for change. We talked about expectations from a consumer perspective. There's also operational benefits to having modern technology, right? You can route payments faster and at lower cost. You can get rid of very expensive hardware infrastructure if you embrace a cloud-native solution. So I think both CIOs and business leaders at banks, they've seen the need for change for a while now. But what really is at the heart of this is that if you think about what a bank does, payments is a very important part of it. And so switching out those solutions is a very risky endeavor. And so I think that's why many banks have been holding off. Now, to your question, I do think that's changing right now, really for three reasons. One is there's just a plethora of new fintech and challenger banks that have come to the market. And they really do offer differentiated experiences for consumers. And because of that, consumers are really expecting that same experience from a traditional bank. So banks no longer can really hold out on making some of those changes. I think the second factor really is that technical debt that we talked about. That's expensive to maintain, but even more importantly, it's becoming increasingly cost prohibitive, right? There's only so long that you can find the right talent, for example, to really change your COBOL lines of code. It's just not going to exist anymore going forward. And I think third and lastly, many of these banks that are a little bit more risk averse, they were really in a wait and see holding pattern. And what they are seeing now is that other banks, large and small, that were more technologically forward, that did have that cloud strategy, they are very successful in implementing those new solutions. And so that's just the additional proof point that some of the other banks needed to make that change.
All right, okay, that's interesting. So apart from using cloud then and also leveraging modern technology stack, what else makes a payment solution innovative and also agile? What about that?
So I think if you really think about payments specifically, the core of processing a payment is it's really processing a transaction for the bank, right? And that, in essence, is authenticating the consumer, routing the information, and then authorizing the transaction. That was the same yesterday, it's the same today. That is gonna be the same in the future, but it's how you do that, right? So if you think, for example, about authorizing a transaction, you want to build that separately from authentication. You want to make sure that that solution really supports multiple payment rails, whereas historically, many of the solutions were really heavily dependent on the large traditional international card schemes, right? From an authentication perspective, you want to make sure that you support multiple ways of authenticating. For so long, it's really been validating a consumer based on a card and a PIN code. And now we have things like, obviously username and password, but biometrics, tokenization. So on both ends, it's really not just about doing it right, but supporting all of the different ways that consumers are expecting the process to work, to have that seamless payment experience, and not just supporting what's there today, all of the new ways, but really being future-proof, being able to support what's coming next, right? And being able to support new payment methods, instant payments, real-time payments, right? Split payments, as well as new funding models like cryptocurrency, buy now, pay later. Those are all things that are being talked about a lot now, but there is more and newer ways of authenticating and authorizing that pop up every day. And so a modern solution really allows banks to design, test, and deploy for those new ways of payments in weeks rather than months or years. That's really where the technology comes into play.
That's really interesting. And on the subject of looking into the future, I want to home in on some of the work Diebold Nixdorf are doing in particular. Why is Diebold Nixdorf venturing into the payment space, and what makes your approach different then moving forward?
Yeah, this is a very exciting new chapter for Diebold Nixdorf. We obviously have great relationships with a majority of the banks globally. We really understand their needs. We understand what needs to happen from a transaction perspective, right, through all of our other both hardware and software businesses. And we saw specifically payment processing as a market that was ripe for disruption by bringing new technology. And so our dynamic payments platform is doing exactly what we've been talking about. It is business transformative, right? It really does smart routing and least cost routing and eliminates the need for banks to have very expensive hardware infrastructure because it's cloud native. And we have a very modern microservices architecture, API first, extensible platform. So banks really can adapt very quickly to the changes in consumer behavior. So we really believe we have a great solution that allows banks to be ready for the future. We're implementing it at a number of banks already, and we're seeing very impressive results thus far. So we're very excited for what the future holds here.
Well, watch this space, I think it's safe to say. Some really exciting developments ahead then. And Jens, we're really looking forward to having you on board for EBAday 2021. So I hope we can catch up further down the line. But for now, we'll leave it there. So thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Hannah.